Many of us know Lockdown from the Bayverse movie Age of Extinction, where he was the main villain of the story. But do you know he was actually more than just a contract killer working for the creators? Yes, if you take a deep dive into the complicated origin stories of Lockdown based on different adaptations and continuities throughout the franchise, you'll see he was never actually an assassin working for a specific organization. He was more like a freelancer, and that's why he's super arrogant, nonchalant, and a complete lone wolf in the Transformers lore. Bayverse movie and a lot of other continuities say that Lockdown used to be a Decepticon, but then he didn't follow the cause and got out of it to become an independent mercenary. However, his missions are always tied to the Decepticons, as I've seen in most of these versions. He's working for Megatron to capture his targeted enemies. His very first appearance was in the 2007 Transformers animated series, where we first saw his menacing look and green and gray color scheme that makes him look like an Autobot's worst nightmare. Also, this version differs slightly from the rest because Lockdown is introduced here as an Autobot student who later became a corrupt bounty hunter. And that's why, despite being a neutral killer, he was absolutely hateful towards Optimus Prime and his group of Autobots. And this is probably why Michael Bay later made him an important antagonist in his film. So in today's video, where I'm going to take you through a complete breakdown of Lockdown's origin, we're not going to only be talking about the movie, but also some really cool animated series from the 2000s era, as well as the IDW comic series. So without further ado, let's get started. How was Lockdown first introduced in animation? In 2007, the animated Transformers series was no doubt my all-time favorite Transformers adaptation. It introduced some important lore and new characters to the continuity that had never really been brought to light. The show was a mix of action, intense fights between Autobots and Decepticons, with a tinge of comic relief. And in the show's very first season, in episode 7 titled The Thrill of the Hunt, we're introduced to Lockdown, the lone wolf villain of Transformers. So this episode begins in the present timeline on Earth. The Autobots have found a black-colored mysterious muscle car roaming around the city of Detroit and causing chaos. Ratchet, in the meantime, is having some painful flashbacks of his life. He remembers his time in the Great Cybertronian War, where he had to make a big decision to save a fellow soldier. Now, these flashbacks are basically the foundation of Lockdown's origin in this story. So, in the past, when Ratchet was serving as a field medic in the war, his mission was to protect an Autobot intelligence agent named RC, who had very crucial information related to the Decepticons. This piece of information was so important that it could even shift the war on the Decepticon side, and Autobots were hell-bent on preventing that from happening. However, Megatron hired a bounty hunter named Lockdown, who was appointed to capture RC and deliver the data to the Decepticon master. Although, you should always remember that even though Lockdown was hired by the Decepticons and he followed their commands, he was not completely a Megatron devotee or a Decepticon member. He was simply a bounty hunter who captured enemies in return for getting paid a hefty sum. So all he cares about is the payment and nothing else. Well, during the flashbacks, Lockdown attacked both Ratchet and RC when Ratchet was tending to RC's broken leg. The fight was short but intense, and Lockdown totally overpowered Ratchet and stole the EMP generator, a very important tool to heal the wounds. Lockdown stole the gadget to use it as a weapon, basically as an upgrade for his own system. Yeah, Lockdown is consistent about this habit of stealing things from his bounties and keeping them to himself as trophies or souvenirs. But this isn't just for the style of bounty hunting. He uses these gadgets to upgrade himself, and that's very consistent throughout his arc in the story. Lockdown was about to capture RC and unleash his violent tactics on her, but right before that, Ratchet used the EMP generator to wipe out RC's core memory so that she could forget every important piece of data available in her program. Even after this, Lockdown still managed to knock Ratchet down in the fight, breaking one of Ratchet's chevrons and stealing the EMP generator. Back in the present timeline, we saw that Lockdown has come back once again, and this time he is hired by Blitzwing and Lugnut. Later in the episode, Lockdown used the stolen generator and captured Optimus Prime, who was pretty helpless in front of Lockdown's enhanced tools and upgrades. So Ratchet finally stepped in to save Prime. Apparently, the EMP generator didn't work on Ratchet because he was the creator of this tool, and that's why it got easier for him to confront Lockdown, defeat him in the fight, and save Optimus Prime from his grasp. This episode showed that he was ethically quite corrupt, and that's why his ideas were more aligned with the Decepticon ideology, even though he disregarded all kinds of ideologies except for his own. In the next episode, you're going to get a clearer picture of what I'm trying to say. So in the next season's 7th episode titled A Fistful of Energon, it was Prowl who was tricked by Lockdown's deceiving behavior. In the beginning, we saw that Prowl and Bulkhead were sent to Dinobot Island to investigate some disturbances. When Grimlock got excessively aggressive, Prowl used the EMP generator to heal Grimlock's memories, but from then on, Prowl's change of behavior was visible. He was getting more and more desperate to destroy Starscream all by himself, and that madness brought him to face Lockdown once again. First, Prowl was too desperate to capture Starscream alone, so he went to the moon to confront him, but right at that moment, Lockdown arrived to claim the bounty for himself. A fight took place between Prowl and Lockdown, which was a perfect opportunity for Starscream to escape. Now, both of these fighters are after Starscream, so Prowl decided to make a deal with the Hunter. Instead of going individually, Prowl asked Lockdown to chase Starscream as a team, and guess what? Lockdown agreed to the deal. He even gave one of his stolen upgrade tools from his collection to Prowl. It was the Megatron armor and helm that enhanced Prowl's powers, and together they managed to capture Starscream once again. But this time, two things happened. First, the Starscream they captured was totally different from what they knew of Starscream. He was timid and acting weirdly, and the second one is Lockdown's betrayal of Prowl. After Prowl captured this weird version of Starscream, Lockdown claimed him and chose to take him to Megatron because in the end, Megatron would pay him better. Prowl realized his own problems and understood that this armor and helmet had changed him from the inside. He's gotten so reckless that he didn't even care about the collateral damage caused by his chaos. Like at the end of this episode, he realized that during a fight, he recklessly let a bird nest fall down and the eggs were destroyed. It shook Prowl and he renounced the new enhancements and returned to his original look. However, on the other side, Lockdown and Megatron found that the Starscreams they had captured were not the real ones, as by the end of the episode we saw that Starscream had made numerous clones of himself to trick the Autobots and bounty hunters who were after him. In the 3rd season, episode 9, titled 5 Servos of Doom, we saw a crucial detail on Lockdown's origin. It directly connects his past with Megatron and shows why Lockdown is a cold-blooded bounty hunter rather than a member of a specific side. The episode opens in the city of Detroit at night when Autobots are tracking down a Decepticon signal. Prowl leads the investigation and finds out that it was a false beacon signal to trick them. However, at the same time, Sentinel Prime had been missing, and it was found out that Blitzwing, Swindle, and later Lugnut were all captured by Sentinel Prime. Optimus Prime was suspicious about this from the beginning, so he talked to Prowl about it, sharing that he had earlier noticed a mysterious shadow or a silhouette of a helmet. Prowl looked for the possible identities of that helmet and found out that it was his old master, Megatron. Now, Prowl had quite a bit of history in his early times when he was training for Cyber Ninja. He was a bit reckless and avoidant, but Megatron was the one who taught him discipline and perhaps shaped him the way he is now in the present. Also during this time, Prowl learned about a disgraced student who was none other than Lockdown, but that time, Prowl wasn't much aware of his real identity. He came to find that out later in the present timeline when he and Jazz followed Sentinel to Tigatron Stadium and found him working with Lockdown. It became clear that it was Lockdown who appeared with the Megatron helmet on. In the flashbacks of Prowl, we saw that Dojo was actually attacked by this disgraced student, Lockdown, and Megatron was severely wounded, taking his last breath when Prowl tried to save him, but couldn't. So there was a seed of vengeance already in Prowl's heart, and when he finally got to confront Lockdown, he got into a fight with him and demanded the weapons back. We eventually came to the final fight between Prowl and Lockdown inside the ship and then outside the stadium. Prowl pulled off the armor and weapons in style and delivered that one line that made him so different from Lockdown's corrupted ideologies. He said that Megatron has taught him one thing, and that is the power and importance of the warrior more than a weapon. So he used the processor over matter to save all the warriors from a falling scoreboard and even saved Lockdown's life as well. At the end, Lockdown escaped the scene once again. These three most instances in the Transformers animated series that I just talked about are the most prominent examples where Lockdown appeared as a threat, but in the final battle, or what we call the endgame of the show, Lockdown didn't come back to take a part, and that was a deliberate choice because Lockdown's character is designed as a bounty hunter who doesn't care about anything, so it was intentional that he didn't take part in a larger battle where there's no such benefit for him. How does IDW's G1 continuity recast him? Okay, so the next continuity I'm going to talk about is not actually completely focused on Lockdown. I mean, IDW Publishing's Transformers Drift does not center around Lockdown, but the main focus is on Drift. But here, Lockdown's role differs from what we have discussed in the animated series. Lockdown is just a part of Megatron's large-scale plan, but at its core, Lockdown is still the selfish bounty hunter that we know of. In issue number 2, Drift is in the underground operating base called Crystal City, as you can see from the start. He's under the guidance of Wing and the Circle of Light, the neutral group of Transformers. Here we saw Drift's past violent life as a Decepticon and how he survived and lived in rebellion in the streets. He was always a Decepticon, so the Circle of Light is not totally trusting him or even considering him as a member of their team. However, Wing is pretty optimistic and believes that, with time, Drift can be something useful for them. In this issue, Crystal City is shown as a hidden safe haven where many scientists and scholars now live and are trying to build a better version of Cybertron. Drift, in the midst of this allure, tries to adapt, but he still believes that, as a Decepticon, he's the superior one, so Wing tries to train him through battles. In none of these fights does Drift manage to overpower Wing, and that breaks his confidence. This Drift, who was once a survivor from the streets, was renamed Deadlock by Megatron, and that's why we should never forget that Megatron would be pleased by Drift's decision to join the Circle of Light. And that's where Lockdown gets into the picture. So a transmission was detected, and everyone thinks only Drift can translate it because of his history with the Decepticons. And these transmissions were coming from slavers who called Lockdown in. Lockdown is with the slavers because earlier he made a deal with them to find the hidden circle of Light and Drift. But he was actually serving Megatron, who commanded him either to bring Drift back or completely destroy him. There's no in-between. In the latter two issues, Lockdown's motivation to confront Drift and Drift's future actions become clearer. In the third issue, which picks up from where the second issue left off, Drift has an encounter with the slavers and Lockdown. So Drift is now in a moral dilemma and he's filled with doubts. These doubts are not about choosing any faction, but they're about the question of the existence of a war to survive. Wing, in the meantime, interrupts his thoughts and meets him in the tunnel, where he shows his disappointment in Drift's behavior. Drift mentions that technically he's still a Decepticon. Drift's position is deliberately kept in the gray areas, especially when he goes back to Crystal City to talk to Die Atlas, and informs him that he has made a deal with the slavers to reveal Crystal City's location in order to know their actions so that he can alert the Circle of Light. Now this was pretty confusing because no one really understood what he actually wanted to do here. Meanwhile, Lockdown and slaver leader Braid had a talk where Lockdown revealed that Megatron thinks highly of Drift, who was formerly known as Deadlock. Deadlock was powerful and irreplaceable, so for the Decepticon kind, it would be a loss to lose him. And that's why slavers and these kinds of inferior groups don't even matter to Lockdown, as his only motto here is to get Drift back to his former position. The slavers are also after the high-ranking Transformers because they are seeking out means to become immortal, and in that pursuit, they need upgrades and more advanced tools that Lockdown or Drift possess. Drift, on the other hand, urges Die Atlas to wage war against slavers, but he is not ready to go to that extent. Drift got so pissed off by this stubbornness that he even called Die Atlas a coward. So to fix the situation, Wing stepped in with a master plan. He asked Drift to prepare a false setup of a war to lure the enemies and trick them into believing that there would be a real battle. So they prepared a crashed ship as a decoy to lure the slavers, who got into the fight along with Lockdown. However, Lockdown was involved because of his sole purpose, which was to capture Drift and head back to Megatron's kingdom. By the end of this issue, the battlefield was set, and Drift's mentality of war changed for good. In the next and final issue of this comic series, there was a climax, but it also included a great loss, and Lockdown finally exited the picture. So at the beginning of issue number 4, there was this prep up for the war, and Wing was talking to Drift about the importance of the Great Sword, as this one will come in handy in a very significant way later in this issue. So amid the war, it was clear that slavers were not going to attack Drift because they still believed Drift was working for them against the Circle of Light. So it was a great opportunity for Drift to finally show what he actually believed in and whose side he was on. And he immediately proved that he was no longer working for Megatron by killing a slaver, but this changed the fate of this war. Braid, the leader of the slavers, captured Wing, whose life was in crisis. And before even Drift could do anything, Braid impaled a sword into Wing's chest and killed him. This was a heartbreaking moment for Drift because Wing was his mentor and a friend who was the only one to have faith in him. After this escalation of the fight, the Crystal City finally decided to emerge from the ground. and Die Atlas allowed Drift to take part in the war full-fledged. By the end of this issue, we saw Drift using the Great Sword and killing Braid to take revenge for his friend's death. And Lockdown, who immediately realized Drift's changing stances, decided to leave instead of getting into a fight with him, because the fight would either turn out to be a time waste for him or it would finish him for good. In literally every instance in Transformers continuity, we saw that Lockdown does not involve himself in petty wars, and this comic series was no exception. Lockdown is an independent bounty hunter who got into this role to get his mission done, but when that didn't transpire, he walked away instead of trying to force Drift. How does Age of Extinction reinvent him for a live-action film? In 2014, Michael Bay made a super blockbuster Transformers live-action film titled Age of Extinction, starring Mark Wahlberg and featuring Dinobots for the very first time in a live-action film. Now, in the Age of Extinction, the Lockdown you saw was quite different from how he was introduced in the previous adaptations, because he's now a highly intelligent and efficient assassin working for the creators, the ones who created Autobots and Decepticons. Age of Extinction is actually all about the aftermath of Dark of the Moon. Humans have now turned against the Transformers, and the CIA team is now working on their mission to capture all the Autobots and Decepticons to destroy them. The CIA team leader, Harold Attinger, has a strong ally to carry out that mission, and that is Lockdown, who has made a deal with the humans. In exchange for humans trying to find out Optimus Prime and eliminate the rest of the Transformers, Lockdown will give them the precious metal Transformium so that humans can create their own Transformers. And for that, they have been doing research and discoveries of many kinds. They resurrected Megatron's dead body, and with the help of Transformium, they are creating his regenerated body, naming it Galvatron, in the lab. Now, this has become the most important threat to the Autobots' lives. The first Lockdown was a consistent obstacle on their path, and then Galvatron's emergence as the new villain. When Lockdown first arrived on the scene, we saw his totally gray-colored, heavily armored body and spaceship named Nightship. Now, this spacecraft is basically a containment facility where you can find all kinds of Transformers imprisoned. Instead of trophies or souvenirs, here are Transformers who are the trophies from each of Lockdown's missions. And Optimus Prime is his next target, as per the order given by the creators. Lockdown eventually tracks Optimus down in Texas, where he really overpowers Optimus Prime with the help of his heavy and advanced weapons, and a grenade that creates a battlefield trap for the Prime. Also, the seed bomb was the most important weapon in order to control the environment around it. Here, Lockdown seems more vigilant and calculated about his attacks and the missions, so initially he was successful in capturing Optimus Prime and putting him inside his containment ship. But the Autobots couldn't stay quiet after this, and along with Cade, they entered the ship to rescue their Prime. Optimus managed to get out of the ship, but this led to a terrific crash in Hong Kong, where we come to the movie's final climax. Now, Age of Extinction ends with this huge iconic battle scene between Lockdown and Optimus Prime. For the first time ever, all thanks to Bayverse's live-action version, Lockdown got involved in a huge battle, and the execution of this entire sequence is a great cinematic achievement for this franchise. Lockdown is established as a very powerful being, as even when Galvatron fled the scene, it was Lockdown who did his best to recapture Prime, and he showed ultimate dominance over Prime until Cade and Bumblebee intervened to stop them. Optimus Prime finally put himself together and counterattacked Lockdown by impaling a giant sword through his chest. Lockdown's game was over forever in the climax of Age of Extinction, and ever since in the live-action franchise, Lockdown has never come back. And that's okay, because in the comics, he was never given this massive scale importance that was given to him in the live-action film. How does Cyberverse reinterpret him? In 2018, Hasbro, Boulder Media, and AllSpark Animation produced this fast-paced and very toy-driven animated series called Cyberverse. The motivation was to reinterpret these characters for a new generation and make them more interesting by adding more comic undertones. Cyberverse, however, made a lot of changes in the lore. For example, in this particular episode, Bring Me the Spark of Optimus Prime, Lockdown is shown as a low-ranking official of the Decepticon command, instead of an independent bounty hunter. The episode begins with Megatron delivering a fake emotional eulogy for Starscream's death, and even making a giant statue of Starscream. Megatron wants to pay a fake tribute to him while in the ranks. Almost everyone knows that their master couldn't even stand Starscream. Lockdown and Clobber were the ones to openly admit that it was all a lie. However, neither Lockdown nor Clobber has any say in whatever Megatron is up to, because they're just gonna follow the orders. Now, Megatron announces that he wants to capture Optimus Prime and take his spark from him, so whoever would bring that spark of Prime would be rewarded. Shockwave and Soundwave, who are in the high ranks, ordered Lockdown to get into the mission, and Clobber also came along. However, in this version, Clobber seems more aggressive and agile than Lockdown regarding the mission, but before even carrying out the order, Shadow Striker steps into the picture, overrides everything, and manipulates Lockdown and Clobber to get into her own plan. Outside the Nemesis, Lockdown and Clobber contemplate the situation together and find out that no matter what they would do, they will either be punished or destroyed. In the meantime, the opportunity itself came to Lockdown when Hot Rod arrived at the scene through a ground bridge. Hot Rod was not Optimus Prime, but yes, through Hot Rod, Lockdown and Clobber, they could get to their main target. This scene is a bit comedic as Hot Rod, who had no idea what this place was, got into a real pickle of a situation. Lockdown of this version still shows some intelligent traits, but then again, all he does is to sustain himself in this existing position. Anyway, they managed to capture Hot Rod and brought him to Megatron, who was temporarily impressed with their work, but then Hot Rod almost immediately transformed and escaped the place. Lockdown failed to get his task done in this version, as he neither got to Hot Rod nor even brought the spark of Optimus Prime to his master, Megatron. So there was no reward, but also no demotion, as Lockdown stayed at his rank in Cyberverse that sealed his powers and portioned down, unlike the previous versions where Lockdown was a big deal. Clobber underwent some changes throughout her arc, as she was initially a loyal Decepticon just like Lockdown, but later she became an Autobot ally. Lockdown didn't get any character transformation whatsoever in the whole series, but by the end, he remains alive, as there was no definitive point in the series where we saw him die. Where did the animated tie-in comics place him? Next up was IDW Publishing's Transformers Arrival comic series, which was the continuation of the animated series. It was a mini-series where many characters such as Starscream and Ultra Magnus's lore were expanded, like giving them some backstories before the events of the animated series began. And Lockdown's part in this version is very important for us to know him better. Now, the fourth issue of Arrival comics is divided into two halves. The first is more of a human side of the story, and the second connects to Lockdown's role. So in the first part, we saw Porter C. Powell launch a new and lucrative business idea of using Bulkhead's vehicle form and turning it into a mega van appropriate for the soccer moms. It will be a mass-produced van, and it can be used for various tasks, but the problem is that Bulkhead is not happy with this innovation. His identity is copied and now it is commercialized, while Powell is not even sure if this would work or not. Bulkhead tries to warn people that this is not a safe vehicle, but Powell minces his words and manipulates the audience. So Bulkhead just let Powell do his thing and wait for the consequences. During a stakeout, Bulkhead was confused by so many vehicles of the same design and failed to capture a criminal who used one of them to escape the scene, but the vehicle's poor design eventually caused it to be destroyed. Bulkhead and Ratchet realized that they would have to do something about it soon, so they decided to expose Powell. There was a car painting competition going on, during which Powell was tricked by Bulkhead. Bulkhead blended in amongst the crowds of vehicles, and Powell mistakenly hopped onto Bulkhead. Powell understood the vehicle was still unstable, and operating it was nearly impossible, so he mistakenly acknowledged the fact that these vehicles are nothing but some unsafe death traps. And boom, Powell's confession was recorded, and his deception was exposed to the world. Now this part is important, and I gave this brief discussion of the first half because in this issue, the identity misuse is an important plot point, and Lockdown, who is a powerful and most feared hunter, went through something similar to this. In the second part, the comic's tone and setting changed completely, but the core ideas remain the same. We are now on the moon, where Lockdown enters the story. He's wandering around the surface of the moon all alone like a lone soldier. He talks about his excellence in his work and his sole motive behind these missions, which was his upgrades. Yes, Lockdown is basically an assembled transformer, and his body and tools are all the upgrades he has acquired over time through completing these missions. So in a way, bounty hunting is what defines his existence. Here he also recalls the previous deal where he agreed to capture the Autobots responsible for Megatron's death, and in exchange he would get Lugnut's powerful weapon, Punch of Kill Everything. Well, here he's not aimlessly roaming around the moon, as he's been investigating the wreckage of the ship Nemesis to find out what exactly happened that led to Megatron's death. And then he found out that it was not something large-scale threat, but a small Autobot crew that was the one to kill him. This came as a shock because it was Megatron we're talking about. Anyway, in the meantime, Black Arachnia arrives on the scene. Although Lockdown had never met her before, he instantly recognized her. She was a techno-organic being, so it was a bit risky for Lockdown to fight her with all his upgrades and gadgets all over his body. But there was a fight anyway, and Lockdown was powerful enough to beat her down. Actually, their interactions began with their shared goal to find Optimus Prime, and this is the reason why Lockdown got into a fight with her. Also, being a Decepticon herself, there was a question of why she didn't return to work with the Decepticons. Or does that mean she was working with Starscream? These are some of the things Lockdown was intrigued to know, but Black Arachnia cunningly uses her venom to inject him and tries to download all the data present in his body. But Lockdown was so upgraded, and there were multiple systemic structures in his body, that Black Arachnia felt overwhelmed by the downloads, and at some point she couldn't even process all this information, so she fled. Lockdown woke up after losing his senses, but by then Black Arachnia had disappeared. However, Lockdown didn't even try to pursue her because it wouldn't be a very useful thing in his journey. On the other hand, Black Arachnia could have warned Optimus Prime about Lockdown coming to get him, but she was also on a similar mission, so she didn't feel like this information would be very useful for Prime. How did the movie prequel comics use him? Nefarious was a 2010 IDW publishing comic series written by Simon Furman, and it was mostly treated as a continuation of the Bayverse movie Revenge of the Fallen. Here we're introduced to the evil organization called the Initiative, led by Carter Newell, who wanted to create a new and more controllable Allspark, which would destroy all the Transformers. In Nefarious issues numbered 5 and 6, we got a very brief appearance of Lockdown, but it's still worth discussing because of how differently he's been portrayed in this specific continuity. In issue number 5, Autobots and Nest track down the base of the Initiative and find out that they are no longer active in their original location in Inyokern, California. Now, Initiative has become increasingly advanced, and they possess technology that even the Cybertronians fear. Soundwave is the ultimate frenemy here, as he clearly knows some critical information about their mind-controlling technology to manipulate the Transformers. But he has his own agenda, and that's why he's not opening up properly. They finally found the base and was located in Crater Lake, Oregon. In this new base, Carter Newell, the evil mastermind of the Initiative, has been able to create a counterfeit Allspark. This Allspark can power up the machinery and weapons, and with that, Newell first killed his own board members to get rid of any kind of competition in his way. Now, the Autobots and Nest attack the base right after they find it, but it makes the matter worse as Carter unleashes all the Transformers under his control to fight against the Autobots and capture them. These captured and mind-controlled Transformers are not just Decepticons, as there are some Autobots too, who are not in their right minds. This is the time when Lockdown made its entry into this chaos. Earlier in the same series, he was captured by the Initiative, who reprogrammed him, and now he's not a bounty hunter anymore, but completely a mind-controlled goon of the organization. So by the end of this issue, the control of power becomes evident, and it is now a great threat to the Autobots and other Transformers, because they have lost their autonomy. However, there was another important thing to notice. This artificial Allspark created by Initiative was actually getting unstable day by day, and because of so much misuse, it was about to collapse, which we'll see in the next issue. In the next issue, issue numbered 6, Carter's plan got more chaotic because now it is not just about mind-controlling manipulation. He now wants to exterminate all the Cybertronians from Earth. Now, Carter has so much hatred against the bots that it was also startling Newell's assistant Ingrid, who wanted to know why and how this hatred was born in Carter's mind, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to stop his murderous rampage. Carter's Allspark was getting so dangerous that it could even wipe out the whole base, killing all the scientists and workers there. Even Hank, who tried to stop him, got scorched to death by the energy of Allspark. Ingrid released Fortress, one of the captive Transformers, to know the reason for this hatred, and Fortress replied with a really old story. It was the time when their master, the Fallen, was seeking out the lost tombs of Prime, and in that pursuit, there was so much collateral damage that they didn't even care about it at that time. One of them was Carter's parents, who were killed, leaving the young boy all alone. Even the young Carter Newell didn't cry over these deaths, but he was furious and bloodthirsty from that moment he'd lost his parents. Perhaps it was the very time he decided he would get rid of all the Transformers from this world. Back on the battlefield, we saw Soundwave regaining control of Ravage and deploying microcons that combined with Reedman and injure Carter. But Carter, despite the injuries, tries to run away with the Allspark, and Optimus Prime follows him. But in the climactic ending, Carter is killed by Buzzsaw. Fortress also made a sacrifice of herself by using the unstable Allspark in order to destroy it. The battle was over by the end of issue 6, and it turns out that the Initiative is dismantled. However, given the amount of data it left, there is a high chance that anyone can take it and get back to the base with far more sinister plans. Now, to talk about Lockdown, by the end of the battle, he was beaten by Sideswipe, Skids, and Mudflap. Sideswipe smashed him from behind, totally subduing his energy. Well, this is perhaps the only kind of Transformers comic where he's not mentioned directly, because Initiative has captured him and completely reprogrammed him into their pawn. And that's why in none of these issues Lockdown gets as much importance as it did in the previous versions we talked about. In Nefarious, he is just a hunter, controlled by a freak who knows nothing but destruction. And that kind of fits Lockdown's character but completely changes his motivation in the comics. Well, in some Transformer lore, Lockdown is just a bounty hunter with no connection to the final battles, while in others he's the master villain who faces Optimus Prime. Also, in some different versions we see him as a pawn controlled by humans or other entities, while some versions show him as a low-level servant of Megatron. So Lockdown is a character who undergoes multiple interpretations and constant evolution, and I'm quite excited to see if his position evolves in a further comic or film adaptations, where he might get more advanced upgrades and a better motivation to face his enemies. Although I could go on and on about the possibilities of his comeback, this video is sadly over right here. If you've enjoyed this discussion, please let us know in the comments about your opinion. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Until then, goodbye and see you in the next one.